located what Nettie and Willow are working on at the moment. I think I saw it on the ABC or read it on the ABC. I'm not quite sure where I found the information about the project, but the one thing that I was interested in is the fact that I know, and many of you others also know, that the tree hollows, which is necessary for wildlife, is in decline because of bushfires and land clearing. So this wonderful young couple from up north have discovered a way to increase the production of tree hollows rather than wait 30 years for them to be developed. I'm going to hand it over to you both now, if you'd like to just take over.
Thank you very much. Firstly, we are honoured to be here. We love getting the chance to talk to other like-minded people, and we do find that Rotary in particular seems to have such a good group of people behind them. So thank you very much, Barry, for organising this and giving us a chance to chat about the Hollow Project. I think for us, it really started for us about 6 years ago. We've got a biodiversity conservation trust, 130 acres of land up in Dumbogan, which is pretty much old growth, 150 to 200 year forest. And we'd been doing some work within that over the past 6 years. But attached to that, we have a 25-acre lot that is 60 years ago it was farmed. So we know that nothing on there is older than 60 years. And the biggest thing that we started to see between our two properties was the amount of wildlife that was there. We seemed to have like a lot of food. We had, the nectar and the
pollen, the insect,
pollens.
all the food resources were there.
Yeah, everything they needed. But the big difference was that we didn't have the hollows. Our trees weren't big enough. So Andy started to do a fair bit of research on that to figure out, what was the main difference between these two properties, and could we do something about it? And we dabbled in nest boxes in the past. So on another property that we had, so we thought, that might be a solution. But he came across drilled hollows, and that kind of got us excited because we didn't know much about it. And the research that we started to do, we realized that drilled hollows were in their infancy. I think the main tool that was invented like 7 years ago.
Yeah,
something.
Yeah, I think Matt Stevens invented it about 6 or 7 years ago, and he's really just sort of started to get momentum happening with getting some hollows getting drilled in the bush. But it's, in terms of research, there's very little research done, formal papers done on drilled hollows. So that was kind of an interesting finding at the time. Yeah.
So we reached out to, I'm not sure if any of you know Dr. Ross Goldingay, but he's worked for Southern Cross University and probably a lot of other universities over the years. He's been one of the experts in habitat restoration for over 30 years. And Andy reached out to him to say, can you assist me with this? Because I don't just want to go and put holes in trees, willy-nilly. I want to actually make sure that I can do it. And after back and forth with some 3 or 4 ecologists that we had friends, and even speaking to Matt Stevens, who invented the hollow hog, Andy surveyed 70 trees on the property, and we decided that out of those, we would make 40 hollows. So it went from me thinking that he was going to drill a couple of holes and see what happened to, 40, and this is actually going to be a bigger project.
I think it first started too in that before we kind of even approached the professor, I actually just got up and had a crack at making a couple of hollows with an old drill that I had and a few random drill bits, and got the scaffold set up on the outside and sort of forced my way and created a couple little sort of average quality hollows in the trees. And within 2 weeks, we had them both occupied by sugar gliders, which in hindsight, now that we know more detail, that to have that 100% occupancy in such a short period of time was remarkable.
Pretty amazing, yeah.
But for me, I was just wrapped that, hey, I went up and did my sort of backyard version of drilling a couple of hollows, didn't have any clues about volumes and entrance sizes, and sure enough, they were successful enough. So that kind of is what kicked off the enthusiasm to try and go a bit more in depth with the project. So Yeah.
And there's a lot to take into account when you're putting them in. Like Dr. Ross was able to sort of talk about the behavior of the animals, which was super important. So you actually put trees in clusters because they don't just use one hollow, they tend to use three, squirrel gliders and sugar gliders in particular, but most of them will actually need them near each other. So we picked three species. Andy went out in, I think, September.
5 species.
5 species,
Yeah.
sorry. Oh no, 5 animal species, but three tree species. And Andy went out and literally through the bush, like up and down ladders, carted all this stuff and made these hollows and plugged them up. And we have a wildlife camera, and we were thinking that we were going to monitor it with our wildlife camera, but as the project started to go and we started to talk to the BCT, they're saying, hang on a minute, because we do citizen science projects with them on our 130-acre koala reserve. They said we might be able to lend you 20 cameras. And by the time January came, when we're ready to do it, they actually had 40 for us. So we're able to monitor all 40 trees. So Andy went out again with our son, Will, and the two of them put all these made mounts up and put the cameras. And then I took Andy on a holiday because he was pretty exhausted and we'd had enough. And at this stage, I was a very supportive wife. I was just like, yeah, you're doing so well. Go back out there, drill another hole, like. But when we got back and started to take the SD cards out of each of the cameras, we were told not to be disappointed if there wasn't anything on the cameras, that it's not uncommon for that time of year. This was January, Feb and March. So it was the first few weeks of January. And if we didn't see anything, don't get disheartened. It could take a while. But the first one we took out, we had like 100 images. And then the second one was like 120 and then 80 and 110. And we started to go, we've got 40 cameras and we've got a lot of data. And all of a sudden I'd gone from this supportive wife to, hey, honey, can you make a spreadsheet? Can you start assessing these? How are we going to actually do this? So we're very lucky where we live. We live in Dumbogan's a pretty small town, and there was already an existing group of environmental or just like-minded people who would share information. And Andy was on that WhatsApp group. So he reached out and said, would anyone like to help us analyze this data? And within a couple of days, we had 12 people and we sat there and we'd made an interactive spreadsheet and we started. And over the 3 months between the 12 of us, myself, and we had this beautiful young year 11 student as well, but her studies got too much, so she had to stop. But we analyzed 120,000 images. So we had photos at the start, and we switched to videos, and we just as a trial, but we noticed you could really see the behavior in a video that you can't capture just out of stills. So yeah, we had 120,000 hours and hours and hours of data, and we ended up with about 400 or just under 5,000, just under 5,000 actual animal encounters. So they could be anything from a second rushing across the screen to 24 hours of being in a hollow and sort of going around from there. And we then decided we'll have a mini conference. We got Dr. Ross back, we got Matt, who invented the tool, we got the ecologist back, and we spent 3 days together analyzing the data that we had and saying, what should we do now? And there was, every single one of us knew that this project had to go forward. The volunteers were in full withdrawal from their little SD card, the memory card. They were like, give us more, come on, we want it back.
We started calling the SD card junkies. They needed their fix every week or two, and we do a swap of the SD cards. But
yeah, so we had the team that we needed to do it. We didn't have the 40 cameras, so that was an issue. The Reconyx cameras are around about, with batteries and everything, they're around about just under $1,000 each. So we were kind of thinking, all right, we've got to raise 40,000. How are we going to do this? But we're not ones to let things sort of, get in our way. And we knew that the greater good was there for this.
It was really important. We got a 3-month window of data of how the hollows performed in that first 3 months since they got unplugged, because we pretty much we drilled the 40 of them, capped them up till the cameras arrived, and we went and put all the cameras up and pulled the plugs out all at the one time so that we could really get an understanding of how quickly it took for the critters to find the entrances and start to occupy them. And so we got that first 3 month window of data, and then the cameras that we were loaning had to go back. So they were used for other citizen science projects. So we were kind of like, damn, we really need to get that data over a longer period, and particularly because we were missing the nesting and breeding season. So the kind of breeding season is winter for all your like arboreal mammals, like your gliders and feather-tailed gliders and stuff. But we're coming into the nesting season now for all your birds. So, and yeah, we basically were hoping to extend that camera use so that we could capture that footage to see how successful it was for this season, this nesting season, but also to compare it to the 3 months that we've done already. So yeah, that's pretty important to make sure we've got more cameras to cover that.
Yeah. So we've had amazing support from a lot of the locals and from a few other organisations. And at this stage, we've been able to get 24 cameras back out into the field, which is amazing. And the BCT came back and have given us cameras until
September the 12th.
September the 12th. We're hosting a landholders day at the property for the region, and they said we need to give the cameras to the landholders on that day so you can have them up until then. So we'll be taking them out of the tree very last minute before we have to give them back. But we've got a local school has lent us 3. So we're sort of getting down there, and I think we're down to about $6,000 to get the rest of them. So we know we can do it. We're pretty excited about being able to move forward with the 40. And then that opens us really up to when we're where do we go sort of from there. So we want to monitor the hollows for both the animal uptake and also how the tree actually performs. Like the tree will try and grow back, and what will happen to the entrance? Will the internal volume get bigger or smaller? Like there's a lot of questions to answer with that. So we're hoping to do that. We're hoping to maybe look at some other sites with some learnings that we've got to put, another, say, 10 hollows on other sites if we can find them. I think there's a lot of room to go from here. But at the moment, we're just excited to have the cameras back out. We had our first meeting with all our volunteers 3 days ago, something like that, and they're all revved up and super keen. So, it's kind of a watch this space. The other thing that was important to us is education. When we started to look at this amazing footage and a lot of our volunteers had never seen a feather-tailed glider before, or a squirrel glider. They're in their backyard really and had lived there for 40 years and had never seen it. So we knew that this footage needed to be seen. So, when you're taking on too much already, you just decide to take on more. So we decided we would do a social media thing. So we've got Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and we're getting our story out there of these animals. We're trying to do some Q&A. We've got a local school coming in October to have a look at them. So we're sort of, it's getting bigger and bigger, really.
I think the big thing that we're really enjoying spreading the story about how important hollows are. Like there's a few facts and figures that I like to spout off, I suppose, but like 300, and you guys might know a lot of this, but like there's at least 300 Australian species that rely on hollows for living, for shelter, for breeding in. So they're kind of critical, and some of them are critically endangered, and they're desperate for the right hollows to sort of be able to live. And like a typical hollow, a small hollow takes at least 100 years in Australia to develop in a tree. So that's just a small hollow. Like some of your large ones, because our trees are so bloody durable, they don't tend to rot down very easily. So some of your larger hollows, like for powerful owls, big cockatoos, greater gliders, they can take 200, 300 years. So, any of that young bushland, I call it young bushland, like 50, 60 years old, it's just not old enough to have hollows that are suitable yet. So that was where we saw the opportunity with our young bush, the 60-year-old bush, by going and drilling the hollows in it. We're kind of effectively moving it forward like 40 or 50 years in advance. So, you by doing the work I did to put in those 40 hollows, the week or so or whatever it was to make to make them, we effectively moved the bush forward in age, and I think that's a real opportunity to sort of, if the technique can be perfected, that can be done so much around Australia's and even internationally in other bushland that's young bushland. You can really, so we can really, for like. I got the best I did was maybe 5 in a day. I did 5 small to medium sized hollows in a day. So, it was a long day. It was probably 11-hour day, and I think it might have taken me 2 hours to do each hollow. But to drill a hollow in 2 hours' time that might grow with the tree and last for 100, 200 years, it's a pretty good investment. So, yeah, I was, pleased with that long-term outlook of doing the work, I suppose.
Now, while we take a breath, does anyone have any questions?
First question, how long do the cameras, what's the lifespan of the cameras?
Yeah, the Reconyx cameras have a 5-year warranty on them, but we've had ours for 7 years. And it's as good as it was beforehand. Talking to the ecologists, it's the top of the range.
It's the gold standard.
It's the gold. They believe somewhere between 10 to 20 years the cameras go for. So, yeah. Sharon?
Yeah, where do you think these little critters were living before you put the hollows in?
We think most of them were in the adjoining bush. So in our 105 acres next door of the older growth forest, I'm pretty certain they've invaded from there. I think they come and feed across there at night time. Or for the bird life, for example, it was probably definitely in the adjoining bushland around. But
Talking to Ross, because I asked him this question, I said, we didn't expect that many. And I'm like, were they already there? Where were they living? And he said, no, probably in the 130 acres, and they've come across, or a few of the hollows that we would have had. We had a couple of bigger trees on there, but they'll come and they'll breed now. From his understanding is that if there's enough space and there's enough food and there's enough homes, then they'll breed more than what they had. So he said the uptake was surprising, but not surprising because there is 130 acres next door, which is really good bush. And so it'd be interesting to see if the same uptake was where there wasn't bush around it. So this is some of the stuff that we're looking at, hoping to explore in the future.
Tonya, you got a question?
What height do you have to drill the holes? How far off the ground are you when you're, what's the optimum height?
Okay, I like this question. So every creature, I think, has its preference. And this is a question I had to Ross. I said, what height should I be doing them at? Because traditionally, a lot of hollows have been put in only by arborists. So that basically where they climb a tree. And I really wanted to try and, as part of my experiment, I wanted to try and develop a methodology where pretty much anyone could get up the tree and have a crack at it. So I really wanted to work at a ladder height. And so talking to Dr. Ross Goldengate, he was saying, look, Andy, I've seen sugar gliders in hollows as low as 1.5 meters off the ground. So if there's 1.5 meters, literally eye height, he said, if there's not an abundance of hollows, they'll take those ones that might not be their preference. So of course, the higher up the tree, the better. But for this study, we stuck within a range of 3 to 5 meters. So 3 to 5 meters was kind of the range where, you can work off an extension ladder. You don't need to be an arborist to do it. And that was one of the metrics we wanted to test is, will they still be successful at that height? And yeah, I can tell you they have been. So yeah, that's kind of, I went round and surveyed each tree to look for particularly natural features, like if there was a branch stub or an existing scar on a tree in that 3 to 5 meter range. And in the selection process, I tried to pick all the different orientations of a tree. So we might have had 10 trees that had a hollow entrance facing north, 10 that faced north, 3 that faced northwest, 5 that faced west. It was a real mix, so that we were testing that as well as height, Orientation was also one of the metrics, because orientation is particularly important for nest boxes in past, because they've got a history of kind of either overheating or freezing. So, you know, a lot of people are quite particular about how they put a nest box on a tree, but I think the findings we're getting is orientation doesn't really matter, because the hollow temperature is so constant inside the tree. You're not getting that fluctuations you get of nest boxes, that they're not fussed that what way they come into the hollow from. Yeah.
Yeah. Tonya, Bob, you're not going to be climbing a tree too, by the way.
Yeah. But so
Andy,
do you
have
have a larger hollow inside and a smaller entrance? Is that the idea, that you try to auger the centre out, and
Yeah.
is there a risk to the tree?
Okay, good questions again. I probably didn't explain this a bit in our original spiel, but yeah. So essentially, the technique is creating a hole inside the tree through a tiny entrance, and so that the smaller that entrance is, the less impact you're having to the cambium skin around the outside of the tree. So that's one of the beautiful things about the method is, you know, all that nutrients comes up the outside of the tree, and you're literally taking a tiny little hole out of it. So you're really not making any effect on the sort of living organism itself. All the timber on the inside of that skin, the inside of that cambium layer, is pretty much dead tissue. So taking that out of the inside of the tree doesn't affect it from a health point of view, but absolutely taking out a volume of timber from the inside of a tree does create a risk of structural integrity or structural damage, I suppose. So I was quite particular. You know, I didn't engage an arborist or anything like that, but it was common sense. I wasn't going to be drilling holes on trees that are leaning out on a 45 degree, and I wasn't going to be drilling holes in trees next to buildings or anything like that. But I definitely picked areas where they were, you know, large trunks and the biggest volume. So the volume we took outside of the tree for the experiment varied from about 1.2 litres, so, you know, a litre milk bottle, up to about 4 litres. So I think it was like 4.2 litres was the biggest one. And
The entrance sizes went from 25 mil up to about 70.
70, yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's quite a small entrance to get in.
the entrance is really critical, actually. Like, each species has its own particular niche that it's almost like the smallest hole that the critter can get into is the one that likes the best, because then other bigger animals can't get in there to displace it. So like a feather tail glider is like 25 millimeters is perfect for that. If it gets a bit bigger, then a sugar glider can push its way in there, and like, you know, 38 mil to 50 millimeters big enough for squirrel gliders, and then you get a bit bigger than that, and then you can start to get, you know, birds that fit in. But yeah, it's a real hierarchy, and that entrance diameter is really critical. So it was really interesting.
Now, Tonya, you have a question. I'm dying to know what it is.
Netta, the camera, once the cameras went in, have you discovered species that you didn't know were on your property?
No, but we have been doing a lot of wildlife cameras on there for 7 years. One of the species that we didn't expect to be in the hollows as much as it was the antechinus. Obviously, they spend a lot of time up on the ground, but they were the first kind of to most. Them and the feathertail gliders were the first ones I would normally see. They're the first ones in the hollow. They're like the ADHD kid. They're like, what's happening? Let's go in this hollow. What are we doing? And jumping out again. Whereas the feathertail gliders, you would notice they'd come up, oh, there's a hollow. Shall I look at it? Maybe I'll come back in an hour. And they would sort of come back 4 or 5 times. So that was probably the main one. The bird.
We got a lot of bird life. There was,
Yeah.
I mean, because we inadvertently built a perch, we'd created, to put the camera mount on, we pretty much created a sort of a hardwood mount, and it was a beautiful perch for birds to come and sit on, and you know, just do their daily routine.
Just 3 months, we had 35 species of birds come on there, which was pretty amazing. Luckily for us, the volunteers also, half of them were birdies, and very, very educated in birds within our region. So we had one or a couple in particular that we could send each bird to if we didn't know what it was when we were doing the categorizing of what they were, and they would help us out. Obviously, we had sound as well, so they were able to listen to both the sound and the video. But not surprising, we were surprised how many and in such a short time. Like, I'm still overwhelmed that one tree has so much activity per night, which is just showing that every tree that gets taken down was of value. You know, it's like just eliminating a house from our street and saying, oh, well, they've got lots of houses, we don't need that one. But I was really, that was pretty overwhelming for me, how important each tree was.
Thank you.
Adrian?
Oh, yes. Hi. What a wonderful project you've been doing. My background actually is in the last 7 years. My wife and I have been volunteering with Oatley Flora and Fauna Conservation Society. So we've actually organised people, like you said, who build nest boxes, and we had a number of speakers in that area. So your project in building, I think, a Melbourne University group looking at tree hollows, artificial tree hollows. So your work is quite amazing. Couple of questions. One was on weather. I'm sure you considered the way you made the hollows and the potential impact of weather. And the other one was, in the short time, have you seen any actual nesting, particularly from the birds' point of view, any pairs nesting in your hollows?
So the second part of that first, the nesting side of things, we've only seen, so we targeted tree creepers as one of the species. So we targeted 5 different species with 5 hollow designs. So we did feather-tailed gliders, sugar glider, squirrel glider as a second one. We tried a hollow series for microbats. We did small to medium parrots, and we did the tree creeper. So the tree creeper is a bird that wanders up the tree and nests in the hollows. And so we've seen a lot of I don't know, it's almost like housekeeping action. There's been pairs of tree creepers going up into the tree and, checking them out, pulling out all the nesting material that's inside and sort of telling his girlfriend, hey, this looks pretty nice. What do you think of this place? And, it's a real interesting behaviour, but I haven't seen any of them actually nesting yet. But I think now's the time where it's going to kick off.
Yeah, we're assuming with the cameras that we've got out at the moment, we are seeing leaves in a lot of the hollows from the ground. When Andy was putting the cameras back up, we could see that. So we know that there's going to be nesting of both birds and sugar gliders, squirrel gliders, and feather-tailed gliders.
We've definitely, from the bird's point, we've definitely got occupancy of gliders though. Like there's, I think about a third of the hollows were either occupied when I did my last check on them, were either occupied or had evidence of it. So there was either old nesting material or fresh green leaves still in there, but no critter, which I was wrapped with, because we've got another third of the hollows, and this gets to your first point about weather. We've got another bunch of hollows that are actually flooded, and so this is a big part of our project. So the hollows that have been built so far by Matt, who's invented the tool, and a few other practitioners, most of them seem to be building the hollows to try and exclude moisture, and so they'll have an entrance. If they have an entrance spout, they'll have an entrance spout going into the tree, and it's either facing directly out or facing downwards to sort of prevent water coming down and flooding the hollows. And the point of difference, I suppose, and this is one area where we thought we really need to do some research, was I kept on looking at the trees going, they're all branches face up. Most of them do. 90% of the hollows you see have an entrance facing upwards naturally. Like the branches face up, a branch drops off or it gets broken off in a storm, and that broken butt basically allows moisture to come into it. You get that microbial activity, you get insects, and it gradually develops and it grows and grows and grows. And generally that entrance faces upwards, and the moisture coming into it keeps acting and improving and growing the hollow. So to exclude moisture, I just wanted to, I didn't know if it was
well, also not to mimic natural. So we were looking at our 130 acres and we're like, if we can mimic that as much as we possibly can. We were concerned about flooding as a negative, And just before we did it, one of the ecologists said, don't always think about that as a negative, because they actually need water. You might end up with a swimming pool or a drinking station. And what happened in the first 3 months is 6 of them, I think, filled with water out of the 40. They were my favorite trees to analyze. Every single night we had feathertail gliders, we had sugar gliders, squirrel gliders. The antechinus, they don't go near it once it's got water in it. We had the potter wasp. We've had birds drinking out of the tree creepers, drinking out of them. So the feathertail gliders need to keep actually moist. So they would go down to the hollow, swim in the hollow, and come out again. And then they'd come back an hour later and drink. We watched that over the summer. We've kept our one Reconyx on that tree the whole time, thinking that that would die off over the winter. But in fact, there's barely a night that there isn't an animal drinking from that. We've had some arborists see the work that we've done who are doing tree hollows, and they're pretty excited by the flooded hollows, to the point that they're saying we now need to probably try and put flooded hollows in. So Andy's now working out why out of the 40 did those 6 flood. He's been doing a fair bit of research on that. Can we actually get to the point where we can design a hollow to flood and design one not to flood, but still keep them up? Obviously with bushfire, we know that having them going up is the spout going upwards or straight is better.
Just to shed heat or to protect from heat
and smoke
coming up.
Yeah, they can live for so long with the smoke and things like that if they're going there. So far the going up and dealing with the weather, but that's where the north, south, east, west, we're going to start to do some analytical work on. Doesn't matter which way it's facing, but also doesn't matter the bark on the tree, which is what we're thinking. Heavier barked trees, there's a whole
the hollows we've seen, I think 2/3 of them were on smooth bark trees, so where the water can really sheet down the side of the trunk, and that's where it has a chance to sort of get into the hollow. But yeah, there's a bit that's kind of one area that we're really looking forward to getting more data to be able to analyse that further, because that's going to inform the entrance design of how you sort of create that, how you can control flooding or not flood.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great
can I ask
questions.
another question or make a statement? I noticed at Beecroft railway station, if you're standing on the platform, you can see in the trees just past the station there that they've built bird shelters attached to the trees. So they're not actually digging into the tree, they're just building a little unit that attaches to the tree. And I thought maybe in conjunction with men's sheds and something like that, you could develop some sort of type of unit that you could just attach to a tree that could have the watering effect and other effects that you have, and face them in the right directions and move them around just that little bit, that could be helpful to the project.
I think the beautiful thing about it, drilling a hollow into a live tree, if we can get the parameters right, which I think we're 95% of the way there, once you've done it, that can grow with the tree, set and forget. It's not like nest boxes where, a nest box, you put a nest box up and you've got to get it up there for starters, and it's usually made out of, whatever materials you can get to hand. And generally they might last 5 years, 10 years, and then they sort of fall off the tree and you've got to redo it again. But if you can drill a hollow successfully, and its entrance stays open, it'll just continue to grow with the tree for another 100 years. So it's a pretty good return on investment in that way. So
maybe there's a combination aspect that you could have, with some support,
We're about to jump out
Yep.
at the moment. So Andy and Nettie, I'm going to send everyone your emails so that if anyone's listening representing a club or an organisation that wants to provide some funds to you, I'll let them know, and they can contact you directly and see if we can get some funding on the project. But I'd also like to see if we can get on a mailing list and hear some more of it from you, and maybe we could all come up for a visit